Jesus reveals what to do when you feel nothing but pain. Have you ever felt like you are slowly sinking into an invisible abyss, screaming inside but no one is listening? As if pain took over every space of your soul, suffocating hope and paralyzing any will to continue. Sometimes life is so heavy that even breathing seems to hurt. And the worst thing is when you pray, cry, and the sky remains silent. It is in this dark place of the soul that many get lost. But what if I told you that Jesus reveals something to you that almost no one has ever told you about these moments? Something that has been hidden, suppressed, silenced for centuries, but today finally is being exposed to you. This is not a common message. It's not just another video. It's a date, a summons, a direct response from heaven to a pain that the world would never understand. You have been guided here, and this is no coincidence. What's about to be revealed may be exactly what your wounded heart has been begging for so long. But be careful. This is not a light, comfortable, or superficial message. It's deep, intense, and will touch wounds that you may have tried to hide even from yourself. But it is precisely there, in the most sensitive point of the soul, that Jesus begins the healing. Because Jesus reveals to you today a powerful secret about what to do when you feel nothing but pain. And this secret could change everything. But before continuing, take a deep breath. Allow yourself to feel. Because in the next few minutes, you won't just be hearing words, you'll be entering a spiritual atmosphere where Jesus wants to speak directly to your heart. Are you ready? Because what comes now, no one has ever told you before. Take a deep breath now and open your heart to this message. It is no coincidence that you are here. Amid so many videos, so many distractions, so much noise that tries to occupy your mind, you were led to this exact moment because Jesus wants to reveal something to you that goes beyond words. There is a spiritual movement happening right now as you watch. There are pains inside you that perhaps no one sees, but heaven is aware. You feel like you can't take it anymore, that you're on the verge of an inner collapse, and yet you keep smiling on the outside, but inside, everything collapses in silence. This video is more than a message. It's a sacred space where pain finds purpose, and where the wounded soul can finally breathe in peace. Jesus reveals the path to you, but it is you who needs to choose to follow. If this word has already started to touch your heart, enjoy this video right now as an act of faith. Yes, your like could be the instrument that God will use to make this message reach another afflicted soul who is about to give up today. Subscribe to this channel if you feel you need to continue receiving words that bring healing and liberation, not as a mechanical gesture, but as part of a spiritual mission. And now, I want to challenge you to comment with all the faith that still remains in your heart. Write in the comments, Jesus, I need you now. Not on impulse, but as a typed prayer, as a cry of the soul, as an act of radical trust. Because whoever comments on this recognizes that they have reached their limit and are ready to be restored. And no, we haven't yet gotten to what Jesus revealed, because what he has to say is so profound, so unexpected, that it needs to be received with reverence. Get ready, because what you're about to hear could change everything. Pain doesn't always come screaming. Sometimes it arrives slowly, silently, and settles like an invisible weight on the soul. You try to pray, but you feel like nothing changes. The days pass, but inside you everything remains stagnant, as if you were trapped in a cycle of endless suffering. And it is precisely in these moments that we ask ourselves, where is God when everything hurts? This question resonates loudly, but what almost no one realizes is that some of God's most profound answers emerge in the darkest scenarios. And when the pain seems unbearable, that's when a revelation begins that can transform everything. Let's go back in time to a story where suffering, then it reached the human limit. And even then, something supernatural happened. It was as if everything had been ripped away at once. The sun was still rising, but for Job, the light seemed to have disappeared from his soul. Imagine waking up one day and discovering that you have lost everything. Children, health, security, people's respect, even the support of your own wife. He did not commit any crime. He did not betray anyone. He did not turn his back on God. On the contrary, he was righteous, fearful, faithful. But still, he was crushed by a pain that seemed to have no end. And God's silence in the midst of it all hurt even more. While many would scream in despair or curse the sky, Job only whispers a phrase that defies all human logic. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil? Job 2:10. This question echoes not as a blind resignation, but as a conviction that only arises in the depths of the wounded soul. And this is where pain turns into revelation. Jesus reveals to you that there is something greater operating behind the suffering that you do not understand today. Have you ever felt like you were being punished for something you didn't do? Have you ever cried so much that you had no more tears? Have you ever looked at the sky and instead of answers only found silence? This is where many give up, because paralyzing pain doesn't scream. It crushes in silence. It makes you think that God has moved away. But what if I told you that this silence could be a type of care that most people don't understand? Jesus reveals to you that the sky remains active even when everything on earth seems to collapse. Job didn't understand what was happening. He only saw loss, death, abandonment. But there was a spiritual scenario that he was unaware of. God was allowing the test. Yes, but he had not lost control, and that changes everything. Job's suffering was not proof of abandonment, but of divine trust. God allowed Satan to touch everything but his soul, because he knew, even though he was injured, Job would still recognize the character of a good God. But who today would have that same stance? How many people have given up on God for much less? And maybe you're almost there too. Do you know what hurts more than pain? The feeling that it will never end, that it will slowly consume you. But there is something sacred at the bottom of this abyss, something that only those who have been broken inside understand. There is a level of intimacy with God that can only be achieved when you have nothing else. And Job discovered this, because when everything else was removed, he found something no one could take away: his faith in a God who was still trustworthy. Now take a deep breath. Allow yourself to feel this pain without shame. Don't try to appear strong. Job did not pretend to be invincible. He cried, he lamented, but he never stopped believing. And perhaps that is the key to your liberation today. Jesus reveals to you that it is not the absence of pain that proves faith, but the decision to continue even bleeding inside. And I want to provoke you now. Do you really believe that your pain is greater than God's purpose? Or is it part of that purpose, even if you don't understand it? Many people use suffering as justification for abandoning their faith. But Job did exactly the opposite. He used pain as an argument to continue trusting. Now tell me with courage, in the comments, are you one of those who walk away from God when everything goes wrong? Or those who throw yourself even deeper into his arms even without understanding anything? Comment with faith. Even though I'm hurt, I trust. And challenge others to reflect on this too. Oh, and if this word spoke to you in a profound way, if you felt God reach you where you are, click like right now. Not for myself, but as an act of faith, a sign to heaven that you are listening, even though you are crying. Because sometimes a simple click can be a spiritual cry saying, I'm still here, Lord, but there is a pain that is perhaps even more difficult to bear, the one that no one sees, no one understands, a silent pain that gnaws at the inside and doesn't even find space to be explained. And it is about this pain, the one that you hide even from your own thoughts, that we are going to talk about now. Because the next story shows how God responds to even the most silent cries of the soul. Some pains are screamed, others are swallowed in silence. And sometimes, what hurts most is not the suffering itself, but the fact that no one realizes it exists. You are smiling on the outside, but inside, you seem to be slowly dying. You walk among people, talk, answer messages, go to work, church, even post on social media. But no one has any idea of the abyss you hide in your chest. Because there is a type of suffering that does not appear in examinations, cannot be explained in words, and seems invisible to everyone's eyes, except to the eyes of God. It is in this scenario that we meet Anna, a stereotypical woman, humiliated, forgotten inside her own house. Peninnah, Elkanah's other wife, mocked her year after year. The culture of the time said that a woman's value was in bearing children, and Anna couldn't. No matter how much she prayed, no matter how hard she tried, it was as if the sky was locked. But what hurt most wasn't just the physical sterility, it was the feeling of emotional worthlessness, the feeling of not being seen. How many Annas live like this today? Women, men, young people who feel diminished without purpose, carrying labels that society has imposed. Perhaps you have heard yourself, you are weak, you are insufficient, you will never be capable. But Jesus reveals to you that the silence of the soul is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of something too profound to understand now. The Bible says that Hannah, in bitterness of soul, prayed to the Lord and wept abundantly. 1 Samuel 1:10. The verse is simple, but it hides an ocean of pain. Bitterness of soul is not common sadness. It's a type of pain that consumes, that suffocates, that breaks a person inside. And still, she didn't give up. Anna spilled what she had. It wasn't a pretty prayer. There were no theologically correct words. It was just pain. And do you know what God did? What no one else did. He listened. The priest Eli, upon seeing her, thought she was drunk. Look how absurd. Even God's representative on earth did not recognize the depth of that prayer. Because the world is like that. He judges what he doesn't understand. He labels what he cannot explain. But Jesus reveals to you that God does not need words to hear your cry. He hears even what was not said. He interprets tears. Maybe you are exactly like this, with a serene face, but with a screaming soul, with everything apparently in place, but emotionally destroyed. And you ask yourself, does God see me? Does he know what I'm feeling? The answer is clear. Yes, he knows. Yes, he cares. Yes, he acts, even if in silence. What if I told you that what suffocates you today could be the fertile ground where God is preparing something extraordinary? Hannah's silent prayer generated one of the greatest prophets in history, Samuel. That rejected woman was heard in heaven. The pain that no one understood generated a response that impacted generations. And now, stop and think. How many blessings could you be silently generating without even realizing it? How many future answers are being formed in the tears you see shed today? That's why Jesus reveals to you that there is no pain despised when it is presented to him. But now I need to confront you. Do you prefer to hide and pretend that everything is fine? Or are you going to kneel and pour out before God the pain that you tried to hide even from yourself? There's no point in masking feelings. God doesn't heal what you don't recognize. Hannah was healed when she exposed herself, not to the world, but to heaven. Comment now if you have the courage to undress yourself emotionally before God. Write in the comments, I expose myself before you, Lord, and see how many will identify with this truth. If you've never commented on a video before, do so today, not out of habit, but as a prophetic act, like a step of faith. And I still ask you, is this feeling of incomprehension that you experience really a lack of faith? Or is there a much deeper pain that only God is capable of understanding? How many times have you been judged for suffering that you couldn't even explain? No more hiding. Enough of being silent. Because whoever shuts up the pain gets sick, but whoever delivers frees. But what if I told you that there is a pain even more devastating than that of not being understood? It's the one that makes you want to give up everything. That turns the simple desire to sleep into a desperate escape to never wake up again. Because there are times when the heart just can't take it, and it is in this kind of darkness that God's presence manifests itself in the most unexpected ways. The story that comes now will show you exactly that, and it could be the spiritual turning point you so desperately need. Sometimes the biggest noise in the soul is tiredness. A type of exhaustion that doesn't just come from the body, but from the daily struggle to stay standing when everything inside you has already fallen. Elijah was a prophet, a man of God, an instrument of miracles, signs, and fire from heaven. But even so, there was a day when he just couldn't take it anymore. And that says a lot more about us than we'd like to admit. Because behind a strong appearance, behind a public faith, there can be an absolutely broken heart, silently begging for rest. Elijah had faced the prophets of Baal. He had seen fire come down from heaven and consume the altar. He was an instrument of God's glory before an entire nation. But in the next chapter, he runs away. Not an army, not from a king. He runs away from a woman. Jezebel had sworn to kill him. And faced with this threat, the same man who had faced hundreds of enemies now finds himself hidden, isolated, and begs to die. Enough is enough, O Lord. This is not a phrase said by cowards. It's a cry from someone who has reached their limit. How many people today experience this same cry? People who serve, who pray, who advise others, but within themselves they are exhausted. People who say everything is fine, while their soul says it's over. And maybe you are, exactly at that point, exhausted, feeling like it no longer makes a difference, that nothing changes, that no one recognizes, and worse, that God was silent. But Jesus reveals to you that your emotional end is not the end of what God can do. Because look, Elijah was not reprimanded for his breakdown. God did not call him weak, not even ungrateful. On the contrary, he sends an angel with water, with bread, with rest. Because before restoring the calling, God takes care of the soul. And maybe that's the problem. You're trying to rise up by the force of duty, by the obligation to be strong, but ignoring that even the most powerful prophets needed a time of shadow and provision. And that juniper tree, that dry tree where Elijah lay down to die, became the place where God began to restore him. That's why Jesus reveals to you, there is no shame in being tired. The shame is to continue pretending to be strong when the soul screams for help. God doesn't need your performance, he wants your surrender. Elijah didn't need a lecture at that moment. He needed to be fed, sleep, breathe, to stop. And God not only allowed it, he provided. Now close your eyes for a moment and imagine this scene. You, broken, isolated, lying under an invisible juniper tree saying, Lord, I can't do it anymore. And suddenly, you feel something touch your shoulder. An angel, with fresh bread, with water, carefully, with silence. Because heaven understands when the heart of the earth collapses. And here's a question that might shake you. Is your desire to give up really a lack of faith? Or is it just a sign that you need to stop fighting alone? Many churches today, many religious voices, make you feel guilty for feeling weak. But the Bible says something else. It shows that even the giants of faith fell and were restored. Now, comment with courage. Have you ever wanted to disappear? Have you ever thought about not waking up the next day? Have you ever screamed inside yourself, enough is enough? Then write in the comments as a spiritual cry, Lord, I am tired. Restore me. This is not weakness. That is true. And God always responds to the truth of the soul. And if this word reached you, if you felt that you were touched by this truth, click like right now. But do it as a sign that you still believe, even though you're tired, that you still wait, even though you cry, that you are still here, even on the edge. Your like today could be more than a gesture. It could be the beginning of a rescue. Do you know what impacts me most? Elijah, after all this, was still used by God. It was still an instrument of miracles. He was even taken to heaven in a chariot of fire, i.e., the darkest moment of your life is not the end of the story. It may, in fact, be the milestone of a new beginning. But that's not all, because there is an even quieter pain than the desire to give up. It is the exhaustion of the heart that has fought for so long, that has believed so many times. But now, it no longer has the strength to even pray. It's like being in an emotional desert where faith seems to evaporate. And the only question that remains is, how long, Lord? And that's exactly what we're going to talk about now. Get ready to dive into one of the most raw and sincere experiences of the human soul before God. There are wars that happen outside, but there are battles that no one sees, fought day after day inside the heart. The worst type of tiredness is not the physical one. It is the one that slowly consumes the soul, that makes you wake up like someone carrying the weight of a world on your shoulders. It's the silent struggle of those who don't give up, but also don't know how long they can hold on. David knew this place well. Before he was king, he was rejected by his own house, persecuted by those who were supposed to protect him, and often confused by his own emotions. He knew what it was like to fight, and still feel like he was losing. Imagine being in the desert, hungry, surrounded by enemies, and still trying to keep your faith. Imagine feeling like God promised you something, but experiencing the opposite every day. David had been anointed by Samuel. There were clear promises about his life, and yet he found himself on the run like a criminal. He slept in caves, he wrote psalms in tears, and in one of those moments, your exhausted soul burst into words that you may have already said without realizing it. How long, Lord? This isn't just a question, it's a cry, an outburst from those who still believe but are at their limit. And Jesus reveals to you that asking questions to God is not a sin. It's intimacy. It's sincerity. It's the soul saying, I know you're there, but I don't understand anything. Asking until when? It is the last breath of faith of those who are still waiting, even when everything seems to have fallen silent. And maybe you are exactly there, fighting every day, doing everything right, praying, fasting, trying to keep my heart steady, but nothing changes. And you wonder if you've been forgotten, if the sky closed, if it's worth continuing. But what if I told you that questioning God is not the problem? The problem is running away from Him in the midst of doubt. Jesus reveals to you that there is spiritual power in continuing to search, even when the answers don't come. David's pain didn't take him away from God, it brought him closer. His most intense psalms were born in the deepest deserts, and his heart, even though tired, still beat for a single certainty: God hears. Even in silence, He hears. The world teaches that a strong believer is one who never cries, who never questions. But the Bible shows something completely different. The men and women most used by God were precisely those who opened their hearts the most in moments of despair. Because God does not reject sincerity, He rejects appearance. And that's why you need to understand. It is not your doubt that separates you from God. It is the pride of not wanting to be vulnerable before Him. Take a deep breath now. Close your eyes and ask, Lord, until when? Say it without fear. Say it without shame. Because in heaven, these words are not a sign of weakness. They are a sign that faith still exists. And tired faith is still faith. Tremendous faith is still faith. Faith that cries is still alive. And now I want to really confront you. Do you have the courage to be honest with God? Or are you going to continue playing a character who never feels pain? Comment now boldly. Even without understanding, I continue searching. If you've never commented on any video, do so today. Not out of engagement, but as a cry from your heart. Let this phrase be your act of surrender and your act of faith. And if this message touched your spirit, click I liked like a silent prayer. Not by me, not by numbers, but for you to say to heaven, even though the soul is exhausted, I am here. Your click may seem simple, but it is a prophetic gesture. It could be the spiritual boost another heart needs when viewing this content. Yes, your act could be the answer to someone who is about to give up. And here's a revelation that will shake you. What if God's silence is, in fact, a preparation for something that only pain can build? There is a process that is only activated when the heart reaches the end of itself. It was at this point that David found a level of intimacy with God that no throne could ever give. What comes now will challenge everything you believe about suffering. Because there is a moment when even Jesus, the Son of God Himself, felt abandoned. And if even He cried out for relief, then perhaps the answer you are looking for is closer to pain than you imagine. Get ready, because the next dive into the soul will expose the cry that echoes in the hearts of many, and reveal the face of God where few can see. There are moments when the soul doesn't scream, it just shuts up, not out of peace, but out of tiredness. Tiredness of fighting every day with the same pain, with the same internal conflicts, with the same promises that seem increasingly distant. It's like being trapped in an invisible cycle of battles where what bleeds is not the body, but the spirit. You even pray, but you no longer feel anything. Read the Bible, but don't absorb it. Mantis, but inside everything seems dead. And it is at this point that many ask themselves, is there still something inside me that lives? David, the man after God's own heart, went through this. He knew what it was like to be at the center of the divine will and still be persecuted, rejected, misunderstood. Imagine being hidden in a cave, fleeing not from just any enemy but from the king himself, someone who should recognize God's call on his life. David had already been anointed. He had already defeated giants. He had already been honored before the people. But now, there was only silence, the tiredness, the loneliness. And in the midst of this invisible pressure, he writes one of the most sincere, most vulnerable, and most profound psalms in the Bible. How long, Lord? Will you forever forget me? This question is not blasphemy. It's wounded faith. It's bleeding hope. It's the soul saying, I still believe, but I'm at my limit. And Jesus reveals to you that this type of prayer, raw, honest, devoid of religiosity, has immeasurable value before heaven. God is not offended by your pain. He approaches her, because a broken heart is fertile territory for the supernatural. Maybe you've been struggling with the same feeling for years, with the same memories that haunt you, with the lack of answers, with the feeling that God is far away. And even though you try to be strong, your heart is already exhausted. You don't want to abandon your faith, but you also don't know how to sustain it anymore. And it is in this space between continuing or giving up that Jesus reveals to you something profound, sometimes asking, until when? It's more spiritual than simply pretending everything is fine. How many times have you swallowed your pain so as not to scandalize someone? How many times have you smiled in church but cried in the bathroom? How many times have you advised someone while inside you yourself were falling apart? David understands this because he lived it. He no longer had the strength to fight, but he still had words for God, and that was enough. David's prayer did not instantly change the external situation, but it was the bridge for him to find internal solace. Because praying when everything is fine is easy, but praying with a tired heart is an act of spiritual resistance. It is to declare, even without answers, I still talk to the Lord. And what the enemy fears most is seeing someone hurt. Keep praying. Now be honest with yourself. Are you exhausted? Do you feel like you are fighting alone? Do you wonder if God has forgotten you? If these questions burn inside you, comment now. Lord, I am at my limit, but I am still here. This statement is not weak. It is powerful. It's the kind of truth that heaven answers. Comment on this as if crying out, like someone who doesn't want to pretend anymore, like someone who decided to stop camouflaging spiritual pain with stock phrases. And stop for a moment, close your eyes, and say, in whatever voice you have, how long, Lord? Allow yourself to be honest with God. He does not reject the sincerity of pain. He dwells in it. Don't be afraid of being fragile before the Father, because in our fragility, He reveals Himself with strength. And if that word spoke to your spirit in a profound way, click like now, but not as a simple gesture. Do it as an act of faith, a sign to heaven, a spiritual gesture that says, even though I'm tired, I didn't give up. Your click could be the invisible help of someone who is losing strength and needs to read that word. Share this video with anyone you know who is also tired of fighting. What comes next is even more shocking. If David cried out with his heart in pieces, what about Jesus in Gethsemane? Yes, even the Son of God, at a specific moment, asked for relief. And here comes the most impressive part of this story, because Christ's suffering in the garden was not just physical. It was the pain of abandonment, of the deepest anguish, of surrender without human return. And that pain, maybe it's exactly what you're feeling right now. There are moments when the pain is so dense, so raw, so unbearable that you no longer feel anything, not even the presence of God. You pray, but heaven remains silent. You cry, and it seems like no one responds. You cry out, but relief doesn't come. It's as if God had turned His face away. as if he had given up listening to you, as if you were abandoned on the worst day of your life. And maybe deep down, you've even thought this. If God really cared, why would he allow me to go through this? And it is at this very point that we need to return to Gethsemane, because it was there that even Jesus, the Son of God himself, felt something that many of us would never have the courage to admit: the weight of apparent abandonment. The night was dark, not only in heaven, but in the soul. Jesus turns away from the disciples, bows with his face to the ground, and prays one of the most painful and human phrases in the entire Bible. "Father, if possible, remove this cup from me," the cup of pain, anguish, fear, death. That moment was not symbolic. It was real. It was the lowest point of Jesus' journey on earth. He knew what came next was brutal. Not just the cross, but the momentary removal from the Father's presence, something I had never experienced before. And this is where Jesus reveals to you one of the most revolutionary truths of suffering. Not even Jesus was spared moments when heaven seemed distant. And if the Son of God cried, bowed, and asked for relief, who are we to pretend strength all the time? Gethsemane is the birthplace of Christ's deepest humanity and the most powerful comfort for his soul. Because now, as you look at your suffering, you can know for sure God is not indifferent. He understands. He has been exactly where you are. What you are going through today may not have a name. Maybe you can't explain it yourself. It is an internal node, an oppression, a sadness that doesn't go away, an emptiness that sets in even when everything seems normal on the outside, and you're afraid to say it out loud. Fear of appearing weak, fear of appearing ungrateful. But Gethsemane teaches us that there are times when even the Savior sweats blood. Now stop and think. Have you ever felt this way? Have you ever prayed and felt like nothing has changed? Have you ever cried until your body shook and asked yourself, has God abandoned me? So you need to know this. It is not a sin to feel pain. Sin is not knowing what to do with it. And Jesus shows you the way. Take your pain to the ground. Bow down. Be sincere. Cry. Scream if you have to. But in the end, say, "Thy will be done." And here's a direct confrontation. Is your feeling of abandonment really spiritual? Or is it the result of unrealistic expectations about God's actions? Because many hope for a God who will spare them pain. But the true Christ does not spare us from the cup. He strengthens us to pass through it. And that changes everything. Comment now with courage and truth. Lord, I don't understand, but I surrender. If you've ever felt like God has walked away, if you've ever experienced that deafening silence from heaven, write it down. Declare it. Not to be noticed by others, but as a spiritual cry, like a surrender of your soul. And if this message spoke deeply to you, click I liked now. But not just any gesture. Do this as an act of worship in the midst of pain, as if to say, even though I feel alone, I still trust. Your like can become a bridge, a hand extended to someone who is also in the Gethsemane of life, without knowing that Jesus has already been there. And maybe you need to share this video with someone specific, someone who is falling apart inside. Do it now. Don't postpone. Because this content could be the last emotional anchor for someone on the verge of giving up. Turn your engagement into a mission. And do you know what impresses me most about this episode? Jesus prayed 3 times, and yet the cup was not removed, but he stood up, strengthened. Because prayer didn't change the circumstance. It changed his willingness to face it. And if you understand this, something has already started to change within you too. But that's not all. Because there is a type of pain that doesn't scream. It suffocates. She does not appear in tears, but in internal concerns that no one sees. A silent anxiety that eats away at the soul, even when everything seems calm on the outside. And the most surprising thing? It also has a name in Scripture, and Jesus dealt with it in a totally unexpected way. What you will see now can break deep lies that have imprisoned you for years, and open space for a peace that the world can never offer. Have you ever found yourself silent but with your mind screaming? Have you ever felt your heart racing even when you are still? Have you ever found yourself doing 1,000 things at once, trying to control everything while inside you were imploding? Anxiety, contrary to what many think, is not just about fear of the future. It's about the desperate attempt to control a present that always seems to slip through our fingers. And the cruelest, it's just that she disguises it. It hides beneath busy schedules, beneath polite smiles, beneath the automatic, it's okay. But inside, everything is collapsing, and in this internal chaos, we find Marta, a dedicated woman, worker, zealous, but restless. The scenario seems simple. Jesus enters your home. She wants to please him, serve it, prepare everything. But amidst the cooking and tasks, Marta begins to lose something essential, her presence. And then comes the verse that turns the mirror on so many anxious hearts. Marta, Martha, you are restless and worry about many things. Now stop and listen to this sentence as if it were directed at you. Why Jesus reveals to you that the biggest poison of anxiety is not in worries, but in forgetting who is in the room. Martha was with Jesus at home, but her mind was elsewhere. And how many today do exactly that? They are in church, but with their hearts in the ticket. They are praying, but with their mind on the diagnosis. They are in praise, but internally trying to predict the next problem. This is spiritual anxiety, and it is as destructive as any physical pain. Maria, on the other hand, did the unthinkable. She stopped, she sat down, she listened, and that bothered Marta deeply, because when we're anxious, other people's rest seems irresponsible. And here's the point. Spiritual anxiety makes us confuse productivity with presence. It makes us feel like we need to do everything until we forget who is with us. How many times have you felt guilty about stopping? Why rest? Why not respond to that message, that email, that demand? And how many of those times did you ignore that Jesus was there, just waiting for a moment of silence to speak? The world screams, but God whispers, and only listen to those who slow down. Now, stop and reflect. Is your anxiety a lack of organization or excess control disguised as faith? Because faith is not moving mountains alone. Faith is knowing that there is a God who can move everything, including what you cannot. Martha wanted to serve Jesus, but she forgot to listen to him. How many times has your activism stopped you from listening to what really matters? Comment now with spiritual courage. Jesus, I choose to stop and listen to you. This phrase could be the first step to breaking a cycle of anxiety that has held you hostage for years. Declare this as someone who understands that true rest comes not from the absence of problems, but from the presence of Christ. And here's a strong question. Have you turned your faith into a marathon of doing instead of a relationship of being? Because if even Martha, with Jesus present in the flesh in the room, got lost in worries, imagine us, who live surrounded by notifications, pressures, goals, and noise. Anxiety is the noise that tries to silence the voice of the Spirit. Close your eyes now. Take a deep breath and imagine the scene. Jesus enters your house. You receive it. But instead of rushing to attend to everything, you sit at his feet, hear his voice. Allow his peace to descend upon the chaos within. This is where miracles begin, not in the noise of actions, but in the depths of silence. There is another kind of pain, one that arises not from the absence of faith, but from the loss of hope, an emptiness that comes when everything you believed possible seems to have died. And it is in this space of hopelessness that Jesus does something absolutely unexpected. What you hear next may rewrite your understanding of how God works when all seems lost. Get ready, because the next block is more than a story. It's a call to life. What happens when everything you believed in falls apart before your eyes? When your prayers are not answered, the miracles you expected do not arrive, and God's silence seems to bury all possibility of change? There is a pain that doesn't bleed on the outside, but bleeds on the inside. It's the pain of disappointment, and there is no crueler feeling than the loss of hope. Because as long as there is pain, there is still struggle. But when hope dies, so does the strength to continue. And it was exactly at this point that we found two disciples in one of the most symbolic moments in the Bible, the road to Emmaus. They walked with their heads down, in a heavy silence, with their eyes focused on the ground and their hearts focused on the past. They had witnessed the death of Jesus. Everything they believed in had been crucified. Everything they gave their lives for was buried. And that's when the verse comes to life. And we hoped it was him. We waited, past. Don't wait any longer. They no longer believe. And how many today live exactly like this? They hoped the marriage would be restored. They hoped the diagnosis would change. They waited for God to respond. But it didn't come. It didn't happen. And hope died. And this is where Jesus reveals to you something that can transform your understanding. Even without realizing it, he walks with you on the road of hopelessness. Jesus appeared to them halfway, not in the temple, not in Jerusalem, not in the place of the miracle, but on the way to escape, on the path to giving up, on the path of it's over, because it is there, on the path where you think you are alone, that he appears most intimately. He did not stop the disciples from leaving Jerusalem, but he caught them in the middle of their flight, and the most impactful, they didn't recognize him. And how often does this happen to us? Jesus is with us, but we do not recognize him, because pain distorts our vision, frustration blinds us, and it is at this point that many give up on faith, thinking that God has abandoned them, when in fact, it is precisely at these moments that he approaches. Jesus walks with you even when you don't feel it, even when you don't see it, even when you no longer believe, and then he begins to speak, teaching, reminding them of the scriptures, reviving, verse by verse, everything that had been promised, and little by little, their hearts begin to burn again. They still didn't know it was Jesus, but there was something rekindling inside them, and maybe, as you hear this now, the same thing is happening to you. You don't know what you're feeling, but there's something burning, something awakening, something breaking the silence of your soul, until when he broke the bread, his eyes opened. They realized it was him, and suddenly, everything changed. That road that was an escape became a mission. The night that seemed eternal turned into dawn. They hurried back to Jerusalem, because a soul that rediscovers hope also rediscovers purpose. Now listen carefully. Do you really believe that God stopped walking with you just because the answer took a long time? Is the absence of signs really synonymous with abandonment? Or are you so focused on what you expected that you don't notice his presence in what is already happening? Comment boldly now, Jesus, kindle my hope again. That's not a pretty phrase. It's a cry. It's a cry from the soul. It is the type of prayer that moves the heavens because it is born from a heart that no longer hides behind religiosity. Share this video with someone who has lost faith, because perhaps this is the only spark needed to rekindle the fire in the chest of someone on the verge of giving up. And if you believe that Jesus still walks with you, even in the middle of the valley, click like as a leap of faith. Because yes, even that click can be a spiritual declaration. I still believe, even when I don't see. Each interaction here is a step taken on the road to Emmaus, not one of escape, but of reunion. But that's still not all. There is another wound that few admit out loud, that feeling that your faith is too weak to move anything. A heart divided between I believe and I doubt. But what if I told you that even in this inner conflict, Jesus reveals himself in a powerful way? What comes next will challenge everything you've been taught about having faith. Get ready? The next block will deconstruct you from the inside to rebuild you in the spirit. What about when anxiety doesn't come from guilt about the past, but from fear of the future? When the problem isn't what you did, but what you don't even know is going to happen yet? There is a silent prison that imprisons millions of Christian hearts, the obsession with controlling tomorrow. And perhaps that is the heaviest burden of all, because it has no form, no color, no sound. It just tightens your chest, steals your sleep, and stops your steps. But there is a secret revealed by Jesus in the middle of the desert, and it can break this cycle that you have normalized without realizing it. Sometimes the greatest spiritual battle is not against hell outside, but against unbelief inside. And the scary thing is that this struggle is almost never visible, because it doesn't involve screaming or open tears. It's silent, sneaky, and it starts like this. You pray, but you don't believe it will happen. You say, I believe, but deep down, you are begging not to be disappointed again. This is the pain of those on the edge of faith, where the heart still wants to trust, but the mind is too exhausted to sustain. And if this describes you, stop everything and listen. You are not alone. Jesus reveals to you something profound and healing through one of the most humanly heartfelt stories in the gospel, the cry of a desperate father. He was not a Pharisee nor an apostle. He was just a man with a suffering son, a boy who since childhood was tormented by a spirit who threw him into fire and water to kill him. And perhaps, in your home, you know what it's like to see someone you love plunged into torment, self-destruction, depression, addiction, or emotional illness that doctors can't cure. This father had already tried everything. He sought out the disciples, and nothing happened. He was tired, discredited. But even so, he went to Jesus. And when he arrives, he says the most contradictory and sincere words in the New Testament. I believe, help me in my unbelief. Mark 9:24. How can someone say they believe and at the same time ask for help for their lack of faith? Because real faith is not the absence of doubt. It's fighting against it. It's about keeping searching even when certainty is gone. It's crying out with the last strength of your soul and admitting that you're broken. That Father did not present a perfect faith, but he presented an honest faith. And that's what Jesus wants from you. The miracle did not happen because of the strength of that man's faith. It happened because of sincerity, because Jesus is not looking for people who pretend to be well. He is looking for those who have the courage to say, Lord, I am still here, but only you know how much it hurts to believe. And maybe this is your case. Have you ever prayed so much and that you lost the words? You've tried so much that you're afraid to try again. You've been so disappointed that you've developed a cold, automatic faith. But here's a revelation that could change everything. Weak faith is still faith, and it is exactly at this point that God's grace moves most intensely. Jesus did not turn his back on that man. He didn't say, come back when you have more faith. On the contrary, he listened, responded, and freed the boy. Because what activates heaven is not the perfection of your faith. It is the sincerity of your cry. What impresses Jesus is not his strength, it is his vulnerability. That father admitted, Jesus, I believe, but I also doubt. And it is in this space between believing and fearing that God's power manifests itself with more compassion. So, the big question is, can you be honest with God about your faith today? Or are you hiding your fragility for fear of appearing weak? Many people confuse faith with spiritual performance. They think that the louder they shout or the more verses they quote, the more faith they have. But God is not impressed by appearance. He responds to those who seek him with truth. Maybe that's why so many don't get what they ask for. Not because they have little faith, but because they have a masked faith, a theatrical faith, taught to please the church, but which does not sustain anyone when the world falls apart. Now I ask you with all love and firmness, is your weak faith the end? Or could it be precisely the beginning of a new intimacy with God? Is Jesus expecting less of your performance and more of your surrender? Does he want less arguments and more truth? If you feel this way, write in the comments, Jesus, help my unbelief. Don't be ashamed of it. Don't be silent. This is the kind of comment that tears the heavens and heals hearts. And if this video is speaking to you personally, share it with someone who needs to understand that weak faith is still faith, that doubts do not nullify the presence of God, that the hand of Jesus extends to those who are about to give up believing. Take a deep breath. Allow yourself to feel this message. Do not fight your unbelief alone. Jesus does not reject you for her. He welcomes you into the midst of it. But what if I told you that even the darkest thoughts, the voices that torment you at night, the cycles of fear, anger, and panic, can also be overcome? What comes next is a revelation that few have the courage to face, and many choose to ignore. But the truth sets you free, and Jesus reveals to you the power that can silence the voices inside your mind. Get ready. The next story will confront you deeply. The mind can be the cruelest battlefield in human existence. There are no bars, no chains, no handcuffs, but there are prisons built by thoughts that insist on not remaining silent, voices that repeat, "You are not enough. You're going to go crazy. God isn't listening." And the more you try to ignore it, the more they gain strength. It is a torment that does not scream on the outside, but deafens on the inside. A war that no one sees, but that is eating you up inside. This is what Jesus reveals to you, something powerful today. A story that seems taken directly from the most traumatic experiences of our generation. A naked, marginalized man living among tombs. But the scariest thing wasn't his appearance. It was what lived inside him. The Gospel of Mark, chapter 5, takes us to a scene that many avoid out of pure fear. A man possessed, isolated, injured, and mentally broken. He lived in the tombs. He screamed day and night. He hurt himself with stones. They already tried to chain him up, but no one could stop him. The demons had taken control not only of his body, but mainly of his mind. The pain was visible, but the source was invisible. And here is a truth that many do not have the courage to face. Not every storm is caused by external circumstances. Sometimes the biggest nightmare lives inside our mind, and you may even function socially, work, smile, but inside you are fighting a war. But that man did something that changes everything. Even though he was possessed, even deformed, even oppressed by legions, he ran towards Jesus. Can you imagine the strength this took? How many internal voices must have screamed, "Stay where you are. No one can help you. You have gone too far." And yet, he runs, because even in chaos, there is a part of the human soul that recognizes the presence of someone who can liberate. And Jesus does not ignore it. Jesus does not move away. Jesus does not condemn him. He asks the name of the Spirit and frees that man completely. And the text says that in the end he was sitting, dressed, and in his right mind. Mark 5:15. A man who just minutes before was considered a public threat was now at peace, silent, and free. This is not symbolic. This is real. And that's what Jesus wants to do with you. Because there are thousands of people today who live like this. Gadarene, mentally oppressed. Suicidal thoughts, chronic anxiety, insomnia, panic, paranoia, obsessive guilt, and the worst. In many Christian environments, this is treated as a lack of faith. But are we going to confront this idea now? Is the torment of the mind really a sign of disbelief? Or is it just a cry from someone who is at their limit and needs divine intervention? Because if it was a lack of faith, why would Jesus have freed that man? Why didn't he turn his back? Jesus does not require lucidity to act. He demands surrender. He acts in chaos. He operates where no one else can enter. It silences voices that therapy doesn't reach, that medicine doesn't support, that advice doesn't reach. Have you ever tried to free yourself? Have you ever tried to think positive? Have you ever pretended everything is fine? But is your mind still at war? So this is the time to run, not running from Jesus, but running to him. Even if your soul seems unrecognizable, even if no one understands you, even if people look at you as dangerous, unstable, weak, because Jesus doesn't see a problem. He sees a captive son. And Jesus reveals to you today that you were not made to live surrounded by tombs. You were not made to cut yourself up inside with self-destructive thoughts. You were not created to live in this mental prison. Freedom is possible. And it starts with one step, running to Jesus, even in the middle of the mental storm. Now stop and reflect deeply. Have you already identified which voices are trying to dominate you? Can you differentiate what is your thought from what are spiritual accusations against your identity? And more, have you ever thought that perhaps the origin of your mental torment is not only biological but also spiritual? Does this scare you? Does it confront you? Then this is the right time for you to take a stand. If this word confronts you, write in the comments, "Jesus, free my mind." It's not just a comment. It is a prophetic act. It is a spiritual statement. It's you running like that man ran. It is the beginning of a new cycle in its history. And if you know someone who is suffering mentally, someone you love but no longer know how to help, share this video. It may be that this truth reaches where your advice no longer reaches. And if that word stirred your insides, click I liked as an act of faith and help Jesus' message reach those who are suffocated by their own thoughts. But that's not all. Something even more powerful is about to be revealed. Because what if I told you that even those people who feel they are worthless, who think their flaws define their identity, who believe that God would never use them, can also be seen, welcomed, and transformed by Jesus? What you hear now could turn your perception of personal worth upside down. Get ready. Jesus reveals to you what happens when he looks at someone everyone has decided to despise. Human beings can endure many pains, but there is one that corrodes identity at the root, the feeling of having no value. We're not talking about temporary low self-esteem, but about that silent pain that whispers all the time that you're disposable, that you are a mistake, who shouldn't have even been born. When you look in the mirror and see nothing but flaws, blame, rejections, and failure. When you believe that no one could ever love someone like you. And the cruelest, when you start to believe that God thinks the same. But what if Jesus reveals to you that even when no one sees you, he continues to see you completely and chooses to love you? The story that confronts us now is one of the most outrageously transformative in the entire Bible. A Samaritan woman, someone rejected not only by society, but by religion, by tradition, by the morals of the time. She would fetch water from the well at noon, the hottest time of the day, to avoid looks, whispers, and judgments. She was known for her destroyed relationships, 5 husbands, and the man she lived with now wasn't even a husband. In everyone's eyes, she was unclean. She was a walking embarrassment, and so she hid. But the unexpected happens. Jesus decides to pass through Samaria. He stops right where she would be. He waits for her. And not only does he talk to her, something a Jew would never do with a Samaritan woman, but he engages her in a dialogue that no one has ever had the courage to start with her. Jesus does not point the finger. Jesus doesn't scream. Jesus does not back down. He reveals, "Woman, if you knew the gift of God and who is speaking to you, you would ask, and he would give you living water." And then, in her most intimate moment, he exposes the truth of her life, not to condemn, but to liberate. She is so shocked that she runs back to town saying, "Come and see a man who told me everything I have done." John 4:29. Stop. Feel the weight of it. She didn't run away embarrassed. She didn't hide. She didn't run away again. She ran with pride to say that Jesus saw her, because finally, someone really saw her. And even though they knew everything about her, they chose to love her. And here is the cutting truth that Jesus reveals to you now. You don't need to be worthy to be found by him. Jesus doesn't avoid you because of your baggage. He crosses unlikely paths, breaking religious and social barriers just to find you. But do you really believe that? Because many of us declare with our mouths that Jesus loves me, but in our minds we still live as rejects. We continue hiding in the noon of the soul. We pretend everything is fine, even though we feel spiritually dead. How many times have you thought, if people knew who I really was, they would stay away? And worse, if God really knew me, he would reject me. But this woman discovered that the look of Jesus does not condemn, it heals. That the voice of Jesus does not accuse, restores. That the presence of Jesus does not shame, it transforms. Perhaps you also have a history marked by rejections, mistakes, and vices. Perhaps you have already believed that your story is irreversible. But if that woman, who was already on her 6th man, full of emotional scars and soul wounds, could be the first evangelist of Samaria, why couldn't you be used too? What's more, can you tell that Jesus didn't call her to be a disciple after she got her life right? No. He sent it right after the meeting. This breaks the logic of religion, because Jesus uses those who he restores, not those who appear perfect. And he restores in the midst of pain, in the midst of shame, in the midst of existential crisis, because that is where his grace manifests itself most intensely. Now stop and answer with brutal sincerity. Have you been hiding spiritually? Have you been avoiding Jesus for fear of him rejecting you? Do you think that other people's opinions of you are stronger than God's truth about your identity? Then receive this revelation with your whole being. Jesus doesn't love you for what you do. He loves you for who you are and for who you will become in Him. If this word confronted you, comment now. Jesus sees me. Don't be afraid to declare this. This comment is not just public. It is spiritual. It breaks the cycle of shame. It declares that you are coming out of the shadow and accepting to be seen by the one who never rejected you. And more, share this video with someone who is also living in the noonday of the soul, hiding, canceling themselves, believing that they have no value. May this message be the beginning of a new destiny. Living water is flowing, and it is for you. But what if I told you that there is an even more subtle, yet devastating type of pain? A pain that paralyzes not the body, but the soul, the one that disguises itself as guilt, but is actually a spiritual accusation? Get ready. What lies ahead may reveal why you are still stuck in cycles of pain, even after you have been forgiven. Jesus reveals to you. Now, what happens when guilt dominates you more than His voice? It's difficult to explain the weight of guilt until it settles in your chest. Guilt has a kind of silence that screams. It invades thoughts like an uncontrollable echo that repeats, "You failed. You don't deserve forgiveness. God won't use you after this." And then you begin to hide spiritually, not because you don't believe in God, but because you no longer believe that He would believe in you again. But what if Jesus reveals to you that the place where guilt tried to bury you is the same place from which He wants to resurrect you? No one has known this feeling as viscerally as Pedro. Yes, that Pedro, the courageous, impulsive apostle who promised eternal fidelity. Even if everyone abandons you, I will never leave you. But it only took a few hours, a few pressures, a few looks, for him to deny the one he loved most, 3 times, in sequence. I don't know him. I am not one of his. I swear I've never been with that man. And then, when the rooster crows, the Bible says that the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Luke 22:61. It is in this look that everything falls apart. Peter didn't just fail, he cheated, and he betrayed at the moment when Jesus needed him most. That guilt wasn't just emotional, it was spiritual, existential. And the Bible records, Peter went out and wept bitterly. This verse is an open wound, because who has never cried bitterly for doing what they promised they would never do? Who has never collapsed after repeating that mistake, that sin, that relapse? And the worst, after having told yourself that this time it would be different. Peter walks away. He can't even be present at the crucifixion. He disappears. Disappear from the scene. Leave the mission. Add yourself. Because guilt not only robs us of strength, it robs us of our sense of identity. But here comes the most scandalous twist of grace. When Jesus is resurrected, the first person He sends a specific message to is Peter. Go and tell the disciples. And Peter. Jesus makes a point of naming him. Worthy of note is the one that everyone thought had failed too much. Jesus reveals to you that whoever called you by name before the guilt continues to call you after it. Pedro was not forgotten. He was found again. What's more, days later it is this same Peter. Yes, the denier, the coward, the traitor, who preaches at Pentecost and leads 3,000 souls to Jesus. Do you know what this means? That guilt does not disqualify anyone who the love of Christ decided to restore. But why then do so many people live trapped in a cycle of spiritual self-punishment? Because we often prefer punishment to grace. Because we still believe that we need to pay for what we did. But this is emotional heresy. Because if you feel like you need to punish yourself, then you are saying that the blood of Jesus was not enough. And that is an offense to the cross. Stop now and reflect. Have you been carrying old guilt as if it were part of who you are? Are you afraid to approach God because you think He is still disappointed in you? So listen to this truth. Jesus has already looked into your eyes. He saw the worst version of Himself, and yet He decided to call you back. Peter's redemption didn't begin with repentance. It began with the look of Christ. And today, Jesus is looking at you the same way. If this word is breaking you inside, comment now. Jesus still calls me. Say it as an act of spiritual courage, because no matter how many times you fall, his gaze is still on you. What's more, send this video to someone who has been suffocated by guilt, someone who has given up on their calling, their faith, their prayer, not because they don't believe, but because they feel unworthy. This person needs to know that there is still a calling waiting for them. And if you've made it this far, take a deep breath, because what comes next will challenge one of the most dangerous beliefs of modern Christianity, that praising God only makes sense when everything is fine. Jesus reveals to you now the secret hidden behind the most powerful praise in the Bible, and it took place not in a temple, but inside a prison. Get ready, because what is about to be revealed could radically free your soul. When everything collapses around you, it's as if your soul is buried beneath the invisible rubble of what you believed was safe. Have you ever had that feeling that even though you did everything right, even though you prayed, even though you were faithful, the walls of your life just collapsed? That the prison you are in is not made of bars, but of disappointments? That the ground of faith has collapsed and you don't know how to rebuild? At this exact point of pain, Jesus reveals to you an answer that almost no one dares to believe. There is a praise that only arises in prison, and it is more powerful than any cry for liberation. This story begins where many of us also end up, unfairly hurt, misunderstood, and seemingly forgotten. Paul and Silas had been beaten, publicly humiliated, and thrown into the deepest prison in Philippi. And it wasn't just any prison. It was a dark, damp, stinky place, a literal and symbolic hole. They had their feet trapped in logs, their bodies covered in bruises, and their souls, apparently, with no way out. It is at this moment, when any ordinary person would be murmuring, crying, or cursing their lives, that something radically unlikely happens. They sing. That's right. About midnight, Paul and Silas prayed and sang hymns to God. Acts 16:25. Here is heaven's first twist. Their praise was not a reflection of deliverance. It was her cause. They didn't wait for the prison to open to worship. They loved it while they were still in prison. And that's exactly what Jesus reveals to you. You don't have to wait for everything to line up to glorify God, because the purest praise is not the one that comes after the blessing. It is the one that explodes in the midst of pain. Praise in pain tears the heavens because it proves that your faith is not in circumstances, but in the character of God. What happens next is more than symbolic. It is prophetic. An earthquake shakes the prison. Chains come loose. Doors open. But the most impactful thing is not the physical miracle. That's what comes after. The jailer, seeing all this, decides to kill himself. He thinks the prisoners escaped and his life is over. But Paul shouts, "Do no harm to yourself, for we are all here." That man falls to his knees, terrified and broken, and asks, "What must I do to be saved?" And at that moment, in complete chaos, amid rubble and dust, a church is born inside the prison. The miracle was not just deliverance. It was the conversion. It was salvation. It was the revelation that even when everything falls apart, God's plan remains intact. Now think with me. Isn't your pain precisely the place where God wants to generate something you never imagined? Is your emotional prison not making space for lives to be touched through your resistance? Many times, what God wants to do is not just take you out of your cell, but transform you inside it. Because if His praise depends on freedom, He is still a slave to circumstance. But if you can sing even when you're in prison, then you're already free. Free inside. Maybe today you are feeling like Paul and Silas, cornered, hurt, wronged. Maybe you are stuck in situations that are completely out of your control. But listen to this with an open heart. Jesus reveals to you that praising in prison is the greatest act of spiritual warfare there is. Because while hell waits for you to give up, you throw up your hands. While the world waits for your silence, you let out a song. And that's when the sky moves. If this word is reaching you now, comment, "Even in prison, I praise." Don't say it as a religious phrase. Say it as a cry of spiritual resistance, like a prophetic statement. And share this message with someone who is in pieces, someone who lost everything, someone who thinks God abandoned him in prison, because this person needs to understand that midnight is the perfect time for heaven to act. What comes next is even deeper, because many people believe that the past defines them, that old mistakes are chains that no one sees, but that squeeze the soul every day. Jesus reveals to you that there is a radical reunion capable of erasing decades of condemnation with a single look of love. Get ready. The next testimony is not just about transformation. It is redemption that rewrites entire stories. After everything falls apart comes the second cruelest blow, the voice that says you won't be able to rebuild. And not because the world outside doesn't allow you, but because the prison is inside you. It's when the past becomes a ghost that doesn't let you live in the present, much less dream about the future. Have you ever felt this? As if guilt, mistakes, and old traumas were an invisible chain that no one sees, but that squeezes your spirit every day? That suffocating feeling that, even though you try to move forward, something of what you once were keeps pulling you back? If this pain haunts you, prepare your heart, because Jesus reveals to you today there is a reunion capable of breaking this chain, and it begins with a name that few would associate with liberation: Zacchaeus. He was everything that religion hated: publican, tax collector, traitor to the people, man of low moral and also physical stature. Zacchaeus was the type of person who carried in his soul the certainty that he would never be accepted by God. He might even try to make up for his shortcomings with money, influence, or appearances. But there was something inside him that not even the gold of Rome could silence. The emptiness of someone who knows he built his life on wrong choices. And it was in this silent desperation that he heard that Jesus was passing by. And that day, Zacchaeus decided to do something that broke all the barriers of pride. He ran. He climbed a tree. He exposed himself publicly to only see Jesus from afar. But Jesus reveals to you that whoever climbs a tree hungry for redemption never returns empty-handed. Jesus stops, looks up, and says, "Zacchaeus, come down quickly, for today I must stay at your house." Luke 19:5. This wasn't just an invitation. It was a declaration before the crowd. This man, whom you despise, I choose to inhabit. And at that moment, something in Zacchaeus' heart changes. He runs down, and without Jesus asking, he gets up and says, "Lord, I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone, I will pay back 4 times as much." Luke 19:8. This is where the twist happens. Jesus does not respond with a reprimand, nor does he demand further proof. He just says, "Today there has been salvation in this house." Luke 19:9. Do you know what this shows us? That Zacchaeus' past was not erased. It was redeemed, because God doesn't need to erase your history to rewrite it. He uses what was broken as a testimony of restoration. The pain, the mistake, the shame, all of this is converted into a bridge to reach other lives. What the world calls a scar, Jesus calls a memorial of grace. And that is exactly what is within your soul's reach today. Could it be that what holds you back is not a sin, but the fear that you will never be able to be different? Could it be that you carry the weight of something that Jesus already forgave a long time ago, but you insist on revisiting, thinking that repentance is living eternally in guilt? Let me tell you truthfully and tenderly, this is not regret. It is emotional slavery disguised as religiosity. And Jesus reveals to you that there is a reunion waiting for you, not with your past, but with the look that Jesus cast on Zacchaeus. That look that doesn't condemn, but invites, who does not accuse, but welcomes. And now, with all the sincerity of my soul, do you really believe that it was the past that destroyed you? Or was it the fear that God couldn't restore you? This is the question that separates those who live stuck in yesterday from those who decide to come down from the tree and open the door for Jesus to enter. If this word is burning your heart, comment now. My past does not define my destiny. Write this not as a rant, but as a prophecy, like a break, like a cry of faith that silences the voices of hell. Oh, and if you've come this far and haven't left a like yet, this is the right time. Click now as an act of spiritual warfare against every voice that says you will not be restored. Your like is more than a click. It's a position of faith. It's a prophetic seed to reach lives that are also stuck in yesterday. Share this message with someone who is constantly beating themselves up over old mistakes, because this person needs to know that Zacchaeus is still visited, that Jesus still enters homes that the world considers unworthy, and that salvation still has a right address: repentant and open hearts. Something even more powerful is about to be revealed, because there are people who have already faced the past, who even try to move on, but are stuck halfway, in the desert. And no matter how much time passes, it seems like the promise never arrives. What happens when you believe, walk, obey, but heaven remains closed? Jesus reveals to you that there is a type of miracle that only happens after hunger, and what comes next could change the way you view waiting forever, when the soul no longer bleeds for the past, but is also no longer excited about the future. A silent pain arises, the feeling of walking, but in circles. The heart beats, but does not vibrate. Faith still exists, but it seems dehydrated, like someone walking through a desert that never ends. And the most painful thing of all is not the scarcity of water. It is the absence of direction. The desert doesn't break you with noise, it weakens you in silence. And in this place where the sky seems quiet, the question that echoes is always the same. Has God forgotten me here? If this represents you, prepare your heart, because Jesus reveals to you today, the desert is not punishment, it is preparation. And there is a revelation hidden in this arid scenario that can completely transform the way you see this time. Imagine a people who emerged from slavery with promises of freedom, a people who saw the sea part, the enemy army destroyed, and still get lost. The people of Israel are in the desert. And no matter how much they have left Egypt, Egypt has not yet left them. Murmurs, insecurities, doubts, all of this bubbles up in the hearts of those who walk, but don't understand the path. And then the critical point arrives: hunger. Not just spiritual hunger, but an empty stomach, the need screaming. And it is in this scenario, where the land is dry and the forces no longer exist, that Jesus reveals to you one of the most paradoxical moments in the Bible. Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain bread from heaven for you." Exodus 16:4. Bread from heaven, in the desert. For a people who no longer knew how to pray properly, this isn't just provision, it's a spiritual reality check. The desert doesn't interrupt the heavens, He activates the heavens. And here comes the twist that no one told you about. The manna wasn't sent when they were strong, excited, or confident. God sent the bread when everything seemed lost. And this deconstructs one of the biggest lies you may have believed, that you have to be well to be blessed. No. The desert proves that God responds even when your faith is shaky, even when you complain, even when you don't have the strength to pray. Because His love is not reactive, it is constant. He does not feed those who deserve it, but those who are hungry. Maybe you are exactly at that point, tired of walking without seeing fruit. What started with hope turned into a heavy routine. The prayer turned into a whisper, praise, remembrance. And the worst part? No one around you understands what you're going through, but heaven understands. Heaven sees. Heaven responds. Jesus reveals to you that the provision of the desert does not come in its time, but in the time when dependence becomes total. It's when you stop running around trying to figure everything out on your own and simply say, "Lord, if it doesn't come from you, it won't come from anywhere." It is at that moment that the sky opens. But there is a detail in the text that changes everything. God tells Moses to instruct the people to collect only what they need for each day. Manna fell daily. This teaches something profound. In the desert, God does not give excesses. He teaches trust. Each morning, they needed to believe that the bread would return. And that's why you may feel like you're living only on daily bits of strength, cheer, and direction. Because the desert is not a place for accumulation. It is a place of dependence. And it is there, in the simplicity of daily faith, that an intimacy is born that not even the palace can generate. Now let me ask you something that may seem harsh, but is necessary. Is your problem not the desert, but the pride of not wanting to depend completely on God? Have you been confusing spiritual maturity with self-sufficiency? Because the desert exposes this. He rips off masks, tears up human plans, and brings us to our knees, not to humiliate, but to align, not to hurt us, but to prepare us. Whoever does not learn to trust in the desert runs the risk of worshiping Egypt. And now, if this message is opening something in you, comment now. Without fear, without shame, without disguises, I'm in the desert, but I'm still walking. This phrase is not a cry for help. It is a declaration of spiritual warfare. It's your spirit saying, I'm still standing, even though I can't see anything. I still believe, even though hope hurts. And if you know someone who is in the same place, send them this video. Share like someone offering a drink of water to someone who almost fainted in the middle of the journey. But if the desert reveals God's provision, there is another type of pain that mixes the physical and the spiritual. A pain that eats away from the inside, that bleeds endlessly, and that makes us feel impure, unworthy, invisible. A pain that no one understands, but that Jesus not only sees, he feels. What comes next will make you see faith like you've never seen it before. Jesus reveals to you the power of touch, and how a woman despised and sick for 12 years touched the invisible and was completely healed. Sometimes physical pain is just the visible reflection of a deeper, hidden wound, that of the soul. And when the body bleeds without stopping, it is the spirit that silently screams for help. There is a type of suffering that goes beyond the limits of the flesh. It isolates, marginalizes, makes a person believe that they are too broken to be loved. This is not just a diagnosis, but an emotional sentence. You are not enough. And it is in this place, where no one else seems to reach, that Jesus reveals to you that your touch is capable of healing what medicine cannot explain and what the heart can no longer bear to carry. Now imagine, there are 12 years of pain, not days, not months, years. 12 years of bleeding, 12 years of ritual impurity, 12 years of being seen as a curse, not as a woman. The woman with the flow of blood had no name, no voice, no space. She had lost everything: health, money, relationships. But what hurt most was having lost herself. When Mark 5 introduces us to this woman, the Bible says, "And a certain woman who had had an issue of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered many things with many doctors, and spent all that she had, profiting nothing, but rather getting worse." Mark 5:25-26. She was tired, not just of the blood, but of the rejection. And maybe, like her, you also have physical pain that no one understands, and emotional pain that no one sees. But here comes the twist that transforms everything. She heard about Jesus, and that alone is a milestone. Because when the pain is too great, even hope seems invasive. But she decided to take a chance. Among the crowd that pressed Jesus, this woman dares to believe that she doesn't even need to be seen. Just touch. "If I only touch his clothes, I will be healed." Mark 5:28. And here's the point that many don't realize. She touched Jesus from behind. She was used to hiding. Her pain taught her that her place was invisible. But the sky responds even to the most timid, most broken, quietest touches. And the miracle happens. Immediately, she feels that the blood flow has stopped. And Jesus, who was in the middle of a crowd, stopped. And he asks, "Who touched me?" And this is where the Spirit brings something too strong to ignore. Jesus knew who touched her. He just wanted her to know that that touch had a name, identity, value. She wasn't just healed, she was validated. Jesus calls the woman daughter, not impure woman, sinner, or excluded, but daughter. It heals more than the body. This resurrects dignity. This returns existence. Why Jesus reveals to you that the pain that separated you from the world can be exactly the point of contact that connects you to heaven. How many times have you also felt that your pain was too much for Jesus? That perhaps he is too busy with greater causes? That what you feel in your body or in your heart has no place in the divine agenda? Let me confront you with love now. Are you expecting to be stronger to come to Jesus? when in reality, he expects you to touch him just as you are, injured, discredited, humiliated. This woman teaches us that it's not about the strength of the touch, but the direction of the touch. When you move towards Jesus, even if it is on the ground, even if it is hidden, heaven moves towards you. And if you're reading this with tears in your eyes or tightness in your chest, write in the comments, "Now, Jesus, I touch you even though I'm bleeding." This sentence is not poetry. It's war. It is a declaration of faith at a time when many would be burying hope. And if you know someone who is carrying invisible pain, whether physical or emotional, send them this video. Be that channel. Because sometimes the miracle begins with the touch of someone who hasn't given up on believing. There is a pain that paralyzes the future, fear. And it's not just any fear. It's that silent fear that disguises itself as caution, but is actually the terror that God won't show up when he's most needed. The next block is about the moment when God calls you to the impossible, and you look ahead and only see giants. And that's where Jesus reveals to you that your courage does not come from what you see, but from those who walk with you. Some pains don't scream, they whisper. Doubts whisper in the early hours of the morning, nightmares disguised as logical, predictions, calculations that never come to fruition, and plans that fall apart before they even begin. The name of this pain is fear, and perhaps yours is not a pain from the past, but a paralysis in the face of the future. You feel the weight of everything you haven't experienced yet, and yet you're already carrying the consequences as if everything had already gone wrong. Fear is treacherous. It doesn't destroy it all at once. It wears it down. And Jesus reveals to you something that perhaps no one has ever told you. You don't need a guarantee to move forward. Just a presence that goes with you. It is at this point that the story of Joshua becomes a mirror. Moses was gone. The people were still at the gates of the promised land. But the past of slavery still hurt. The present was unstable. And the future? Scary. Josue receives the mission of leading a tired, scarred, distrustful generation. And God calls you to something impossible. Be strong and be of good cheer. But how can you be cheerful when what lies ahead are giants, walls, and wars? How can you believe that something good can come when all you know is struggle and loss? The key verse of Joshua 1:9 echoes, like a divine command, but also like a heavenly embrace. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and be of good courage. Do not be afraid nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Here's something almost no one realizes. God didn't say, there will be no challenges. He said, I will be with you. The presence of God does not cancel the challenge. It redefines the meaning of threat. The giant can remain there. But you now have a God who goes ahead. Fear is not a sign of spiritual weakness. It is just an invitation to a new level of confidence. And Jesus reveals to you that peace is not the absence of danger. It is the presence of purpose. It's knowing that even if you tremble, he remains firm. Do you know what that means? That courage is not the absence of fear. It is obedience in spite of him. Joshua trembled, but moved forward. He didn't have everything under control, but he knew who was in control. And you? Are you going to continue waiting to feel human confidence, to move? Or will you recognize that there is a calling that demands your response, even if the road ahead is still invisible? The great truth is that fear only has power over those who forget the voice that called them. But if you remember the word, you move by it. Even if your feet hesitate, the Spirit pushes. Now listen to this question. Is your fear really a lack of faith, or is it a reminder that you are about to enter your promised territory, and hell is trying to stop you before you do? This changes everything. Maybe the fear you feel is not because something is wrong, but because something is about to go right and the enemy knows it. Fear does not define you. Obedience, yes. The courage that Joshua found was not born from the absence of risks, but from the presence of a promise. I am with you. If this word is hitting your spirit hard, write it now in the comments. Jesus, even though I'm scared, I'm going. This is not just a comment. It is a prophetic step. It's the kind of statement that heaven honors. And if you know someone who is paralyzed by fear, send them this video. Share this truth. Because there are people burying promises just because they thought faith was the absence of tremors. Faith is walking even with shaky knees. What if I told you that there are moments when God himself is silent and you feel forgotten by him? But it is exactly in this silence that he is working more than ever. Yes, Jesus reveals to you that the absence of answers can be the incubator of your most genuine adoration. The next story will challenge everything you believe about feeling or not feeling God, and it can redefine your spiritual walk forever. There is a pain that makes no noise, but weighs like 1,000 muffled screams. It is not the sound of a tragedy, nor the chaos of a sudden loss. It is the echo of a silence that seems eternal. You pray, and nothing happens. He cries out, and no answer comes. Wait, and everything remains the same. And what hurts most is not the absence of miracles, but the absence of voice. Where is God when you need to hear him most? When the nights are long, the days are empty, and prayers seem to be lost in the air, doubt creeps into the soul. Has he forgotten? Jesus reveals to you that even the prophets felt this deafening emptiness. Habakkuk was one of them, a man of God, with a heart sensitive to the pain of the people and what seemed to be divine silence in the face of injustice. The book of Habakkuk begins with a cry. How long, Lord, will I cry, and you will not listen to me? Habakkuk 1:2. Can you feel the anguish behind these words? It's the kind of outburst that you may never have had the courage to say out loud, but that lives hidden in your chest. The pain of feeling that God is distant, silent. But there is something impressive in this story that almost no one realizes. God was never silent. He was just teaching Habakkuk to listen differently. What seemed like absence was repositioning. What seemed like distance was vision training. God was not mute. He was molding the prophet's heart so that he would stop looking at his circumstances and begin to see with the eyes of faith. And the key to this process lies in a verse that is a spiritual punch to human pride and a breath of faith for the wounded soul. Even if the fig tree does not blossom, nor is there fruit on the vine, even if the produce of the olive tree fails, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. Habakkuk 3:17-18. Do you know what that means? That mature faith is not fed by visible signs. It flourishes in silence. It's easy to praise when God responds. It is difficult to worship when he is silent. And it is in this type of worship that you grow. It's in this kind of surrender that you discover that God is not just a problem solver. He is the very sustenance of the soul. Sometimes what you call abandonment, God calls preparation. And what you call silence, God uses as an invitation to take you to a new level of trust. Faith is not hearing God's voice all the time. Faith is remaining when you hear nothing. You only remember what he has already said. But what if I told you that the greatest crisis of your faith could, in fact, be the most fertile moment of your spiritual transformation? That perhaps God's silence is not punishment, but intimacy. That he is silent not because he rejects you, but because he trusts who you are becoming. Jesus reveals to you that there are silences that are seals, signs that you have left spiritual childhood and are entering the maturity of faith. Now stop for a moment and take a deep breath. Close your eyes if you have to. Let these words sink into your spirit. Have you ever considered that maybe what you call "I'm not feeling God" is actually God inviting you to trust him for who he is and not for what he does? This is a type of faith that few achieve because it demands the death of control. It requires giving up evidence. It requires depending on the invisible. It requires loving a God who sometimes whispers and other times just remains. And this is where the most challenging part comes. Is God's silence really a sign of abandonment? Or could it be the greatest proof that he wants you to grow? There are people who abandon their faith at the first silence. Others decide to stay. And these last ones, these touch the heart of God in a special way. So now I want to see if you are really willing to live this kind of faith. If this message is confronting you, comment now. Even without hearing, I trust. Write this with strength, with courage, with tears if necessary. Because every time you declare this, you break through a level of spiritual immaturity. And remember that today is also a spiritual mission day. If this word spoke to you, click like as a leap of faith. Your like isn't just engagement, It's prophetic. He says to the spiritual world, "Yet I will rejoice." And share this video with someone who is silent, because sometimes a word like that is the only voice a wounded soul can hear. But that's not all. Something even deeper is about to be revealed, because there are times when it's not just God's silence that weighs heavily. It's the tiredness of the body, mind, and soul. Have you ever reached the point where you no longer have the strength to pray? So get ready. What comes now is a liberating truth that can redefine everything. Yes, Jesus reveals to you that even at the limit of strength, grace is still sufficient. Have you ever felt exhausted inside even after sleeping all night? Have you ever looked at the sky and thought, "Lord, I don't even have the strength to ask for help"? There is a pain that does not scream but consumes, a tiredness that cannot be resolved with rest. It's the type of exhaustion that doesn't just come from the physical, but from the soul. That routine that demands more than you can deliver, of the demands that the world imposes, of the losses that you carry in your chest in silence. It's like every day is a new battle, and you have no more ammunition. The tired heart, weakened faith, and the feeling that you are fighting alone, pushing life with your belly and surviving instead of living. But what few understand, and what almost no one has the courage to admit, is that even the giants of faith have faced this exhaustion. And Jesus reveals to you this with a clarity so powerful it can free your mind right now. Have you ever heard about Paul's thorn in the flesh? It is one of the most enigmatic passages in the Bible, but also one of the most human. In 2 Corinthians 12, Paul describes an experience that goes against modern triumphalism. A man who was caught up to the third heaven, who received indescribable revelations, but who, at the same time, carried constant pain within himself, an invisible burden, a limitation that didn't let him forget his own fragility. And he cried out, not once, but 3 times, for God to deliver him from that thorn. But God's response was something that would defy any natural logic. "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." 2 Corinthians 12:9. Can you feel the weight and beauty of this answer? Because she says, in the language of someone on the verge of collapse, you don't need more strength, you need more grace. The world teaches us that we need to be strong all the time. That crying is a sign of weakness, that falling is failing. But heaven has another language. And in this divine language, admitting weakness is the first step to accessing the supernatural. Jesus reveals to you that your limitation is not the end. It is the place where he begins. His grace doesn't appear when you're well. It manifests itself precisely when everything in you falls apart. Now, look deep inside yourself. How many times have you hidden your tiredness for fear of appearing weak? How many times did you smile at the world while inside you screamed for relief? Maybe today you are like Paul, asking God to take away the pain, solve the problem, remove the thorn. But what if God is telling you the same thing he told him? And if what you need is not the end of the fight, but the certainty that even though you are weak, are you still being supported? This is the essence of grace. It's not a theory. It is a living force. It is a power that carries you when you can no longer walk. It's the invisible hand that lifts you up when your legs no longer respond. And here is the most shocking twist in this story, and one that many Christians still resist accepting. You don't have to be strong all the time to be full of faith. True faith is not the absence of weakness, but the decision to continue despite it. How many are dragging their feet spiritually because they believed they could only be used by God when they were well? This is a lie. Paul was useful even with the thorn. He was fruitful even though he was tired. He was an apostle even though he was broken, because the strength that kept him standing wasn't his, it was God's. So here's a question that could shake you or set you free for good. Could it be that what you call weakness is exactly where God wants to demonstrate his strength in you? Maybe your fight won't end today. Maybe the thorn won't come out now. But that doesn't mean defeat. It means dependence. It means heaven is closer than you think. It means Jesus reveals you that you don't have to overcome alone. You just need to allow him to carry you. Now, if this message confronted you, if it touched deep areas of your soul, I challenge you to take a stand. Comment now with faith and courage. Even weak, I continue. Write this in the comments as a prophetic statement, like a spiritual decision, like someone saying to hell, to the world, and even to their own mind, I won't stop. Grace is enough for me, and the presence of God carries me. And you know what else? This is one of those words that cannot be saved. There is someone on your side, a friend, a relative, a colleague, who is on the verge of giving up. Share this video with him now. You can be the answer to someone's prayer who doesn't even have the strength to pray. And if that word spoke to you in a deep way, click like as an act of surrender. Yes, liking this video is more than just a click. It is a visible sign of an invisible surrender. It's saying, Jesus, even though I'm broken, I trust. But what about when all you want is a single sigh of peace? When your insides are so tumultuous that you would give anything to just feel relief for a moment. Get ready, because in the next meeting, Jesus reveals to you that the peace you seek so much is not the absence of struggle, but his presence in the storm. But what about when all you want is simply peace? No victory, no explanation, no immediate response, just silence, just the end of the noise in your mind, just the cessation of the inner war that you no longer even know when it started. There are pains that become so constant that the soul no longer asks for a solution. It begs for relief. Take a deep breath now, because what Jesus reveals to you, this moment could be the turning point you didn't even know you needed. Yes, there is a peace that transcends understanding. But before you try it, you need to confront what has been stealing your insides. Imagine the scene, the raging sea, the boat being tossed from one side to the other as if it were a toy in the hands of the storm. Disciples screaming, water invading everything, and in the middle of it all, Jesus, sleeping. That's right, sleeping. How can anyone rest in the midst of chaos? How can anyone have peace when everything around them screams despair? And maybe that's exactly how you feel right now, as if your life were this boat, hectic, uncontrollable, about to sink, and you ask yourself, where is God in all this? The answer is in Marcos 4:39, when Jesus stands up, faces the winds, and says, "Shut up, be still." And suddenly, everything goes silent. The sea obeys. The storm bows before the voice of the Creator. Now stop and reflect. Why did Jesus wait until that moment to act? Why did he allow panic to set in? Was it cruelty, neglect, or did he want to show that true peace does not depend on the environment, but on presence? The disciples had Jesus in the boat, but they were still panicking. This reveals one of the most overlooked truths of the Christian faith. You can be with Jesus and still live in agony if you don't trust that he is in control. And Jesus reveals to you this firmly: the peace you seek so much does not come when everything is resolved. It comes when you finally give up control. Many people believe that they will only rest when everything is resolved. But what if the storm continues? What if the answer doesn't come? What if life doesn't follow the script you imagined? Will you remain hostage to fear? Will you allow anxiety to set the pace for your faith? Or will you declare, even amid the waves, I know whom I have believed? This is the faith that moves heaven, not the triumphalist faith that demands signs, but the faith that calms the soul even when the outside is falling apart. Why, it's not the calm sea that defines you. It's whoever is on the boat with you. Maybe you are surrounded by voices, internal and external, who say your life will sink, that nothing will change, that there is no way anymore, that there is no point in praying. But there is one voice that silences all others, a voice that not only speaks, but commands. And that voice is saying now, inside you, shut up, be still. It's not just an order in the wind. It is a call to your soul, an invitation to trust, a declaration of sovereignty. And that voice is that of Jesus, not that of fear. And here comes the most challenging part. Do you really want this peace? Or have you become attached to the chaos because you've become accustomed to it? That's hard to hear, but necessary. There are people who, unconsciously, cling to pain because pain has become an identity, because living in peace seems too strange, because being free requires surrender. And Jesus reveals to you, his peace is not passive. It demands a choice. A breakup, a faith that silences the noise of the world to hear the beat of heaven. If this word confronted you, if it exposed how much you need this peace, I want to invite you to take a stand right now. Comment with faith, "Jesus, calm my storm," but only write this if you're willing to hand over the helm, because this phrase is not a request, it is a surrender. And if you understood the depth of this message, now click like as an act of faith. It's not just a click, it's a visible way of declaring, "I believe his voice is greater than my storm." And more, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone who is sinking inside, because sometimes all a soul needs is a reminder that Jesus is still in the boat, even if it appears to be sleeping, even if it seems to take time. He's there, and all it takes is one word from him for everything to change. But hold on tight, because what comes next will shake the foundations of your purpose. What if I told you that even your failures are part of God's plan? That even the days when you thought you were lost were pushing you toward your calling? Get ready, because in the next meeting, Jesus reveals to you that even your pain has a destiny and that your purpose was never canceled. But what about when the silence passes and the sea calms down, and yet inside you, the emptiness continues? When peace comes, but instead of rest, you feel uselessness? When all you wanted was to survive, and now that you have, you look around and ask yourself, but for what? If you have already reached this place of existential disorientation, where pain is no longer screaming, it is tiredness of not understanding why you are here. Jesus now reveals something that can break this cycle of confusion, because maybe the problem isn't the end of the pain, but the beginning of a new calling that you haven't recognized yet. Imagine that. An old man, isolated, tired, escaped from Egypt, exiled from history itself, a man who once had position, power, influence, a man who has already seen the palace, and now only sees the desert. Your name? Moses. And if there was anyone who knew the taste of living without purpose, it was him. Moses didn't fall in the desert. He went. He ran away from himself, from guilt, from failure. He believed that everything God could have done to him had already passed, that it was already too late, that his story would end there. But it was exactly at this moment of end that God began something new. In the bush that burned without being consumed, God manifests himself. In the silence of the desert, he breaks through with fire. And the first word was not consolation, it was a calling. Exodus 3:10, "Go, for I send you." God didn't begin by saying, "I know you suffered, Moses." He didn't start with explanations. It started with a submission. This teaches a harsh and liberating truth. Purpose does not come after healing. Purpose is the instrument God uses to heal you. The calling is not the end of the pain. It's the beginning of her redemption. How many times have you thought you needed to be well to serve? How many times have you believed that God could only use you after everything was resolved within you? But Jesus reveals something to you that deconstructs this lie. He calls you exactly when you think you have nothing left to offer. God is not waiting for you to get up to send you. He is sending you so that when you obey, you will get up. The call comes to restore the purpose, not to reward those who are already ready. Moses tried to argue, to say that was not eloquent, that he wasn't worthy, which had already failed, that he had killed a man. But God was not interested in human justifications. He didn't ask, "What do you have?" He said, "I will be with you." The purpose that comes from God does not depend on your performance. It depends on his presence, and that changes everything. Because when you understand that what qualifies you is not your clean past, but your present disposition, the desert becomes a platform, guilt becomes fuel, pain becomes a bridge. What if I told you that the wounds you carry today are exactly the marks that God will use to reach others? That what you thought disqualified you is what connects you to the broken? That what the world pointed to as failure is what God is transforming into spiritual authority. Yes, Jesus reveals it to you. His purpose was not canceled. He was prepared in pain. And now, it's time to get up. But here's the confrontation. Do you really want purpose? Or are you more comfortable in the survival zone? Because living with purpose requires responsibility. It requires movement. It requires faith. It demands that you stop defining yourself by scars and start walking by promise. Moses had to leave the desert to face the Egypt he had fled. He had to face his story head on, and you too. Because purpose doesn't nullify the past. It redeems it. And if this word burned in your spirit, if you feel that God is calling you even in the middle of your desert, then write in the comments now, Lord, here I am. But don't do it on impulse. Do this as an act of surrender, a response to the call that is echoing within you. And if you felt that this word was like a burning bush in your heart, then enjoy this video as a sign of obedience. Your like at this moment is more than a gesture. It's a seed. It's you saying, I accept the call, even though I'm scared, even though I don't understand everything. I'm going, and go further. Share this video with someone who thinks their life is over, with someone who believes that the past has buried her. Show this person that God calls even those who are hidden, even those who gave up on dreaming. Because if Moses, with all his guilt and exile, was called to free a nation, who said that his desert is not the stage for his sending? That was the last key, the last revelation of this journey. But it's not the end. It's the beginning of a new cycle. Now that Jesus has revealed to you what to do when you only feel pain, it's your turn to act, to respond, to follow. Because the pain was not the end. It was the awakening. And heaven still writes chapters with your name. You didn't get here for nothing. God brought you here to send you. Don't hide anymore. If you've made it this far, breathe, feel. Because this isn't just the end of a video. It's the beginning of a rebirth. Maybe you watched it with a heavy heart. Maybe you cried in silence at some point on this journey. Maybe you felt Jesus touch you in areas that you thought were too buried to blossom again. But now you know. You know what to do when all you feel is pain. Because Jesus reveals to you that this pain was never the end. It was the process. The desert you crossed was not to kill you, but to prepare the ground for your purpose. And if any part of this message has burned within you like a burning bush, then don't ignore it. Because when the Holy Spirit starts working, the worst thing we can do is pretend that everything is fine and carry on as if nothing had happened. Jesus told you. He called you. He reminded you that you still have value, that there is a plan, that the purpose is not lost. And now I want to take you to something even deeper. But first, stop everything. Breathe. Look inside and feel this truth. If you've come this far, it's because God is working in your life. It's no coincidence. It's a summons. It's heaven calling you, and this call deserves a response. So I want to pray with you now. But it's not just any prayer. It is a prayer of liberation, sealing, of relief, from a fresh start. A prayer to take off your shoulders what you carried alone for too long. So close your eyes now. Take a deep breath. Allow yourself to feel this presence, because Jesus is here, not through a screen, but right there, where you are. Because the pain you felt, he felt too, and he came to turn that into healing. Let's pray together. Lord Jesus, today I pray with this heart that arrived here exhausted, but still beating. A heart that has thought about giving up, but decided to continue. A heart that heard your voice and now cries for deliverance. May all the pain accumulated over the years, all the feelings of abandonment, all hidden guilt, and all lies from the enemy that said you are no longer valuable, fall to the ground now, in the name of Jesus. Lord, come in with your healing balm. He touches the spots where no one else can touch, restores the identity of that soul. It makes her remember who she is, not who the world said, but who the sky dreamed of. I declare that from today onwards, this heart begins to live a new cycle, a cycle of purpose, of direction, of real healing, intimate with you. May your peace that surpasses all understanding invade this place now, and may each fallen tear be collected as a seed for a new season. In the name of Jesus, Amen. If this prayer spoke to you, then you need to know this now. The video that is appearing on your screen right now could be the continuation of what God started here. You need to watch, because what comes next could be exactly what's needed for your healing to be complete. It could be the next key, the next step, the next liberation. Don't leave without seeing it. Click and watch, because what's coming is more than a word. It's a calling. It's God leading you even deeper. And if you've made it this far, I want to make a request straight from my heart. Write in the comments right now, "I've made it to the end." This comment is more than a sentence. It's a testimony. It's a digital altar of your perseverance. Share this video with someone who is suffocating in silence, someone who desperately needs this truth. It could be the instrument that God will use to save a life today. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, do so now. But not just as a gesture of support. Do it as an act of spiritual reciprocity. If this word touched you, reciprocate with your subscription. Because the more this message spreads, the more lives are saved. This isn't just a channel, it's a mission. It is a move of God, and you are part of it now. To close, I want to leave you with a verse as a prophetic seal of this journey that began here today. Behold, I make all things new. Revelation 21:5. You are not the same anymore. You are not alone, and your pain will not be in vain.